Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, if you don't mind, we go back and forth on this. Thank you to you and to all your staff for being here. It's good to see you all again. I'm going to start with a question that came from a constituent of mine. And, you know, he works as part of his condo board. And one of the questions that he has in response to the tragedy in Airdrie around carbon monoxide poisoning, and then I think a near miss shortly after that. He has a number of questions. One, whether either the building code or the safety code could be amended to require CO detectors hardwired with a battery backup, and also examine whether changes are required to ensure that exhausts from appliances is not susceptible to ice damming. He also has a concern about side-by-side buildings, perhaps the exhaust minimum distances. You know, if you've got one neighboring exhausting into someone else's intake or something like that, he's got some concerns around that. So just wondering if you could address those concerns.
Sure. Yeah, obviously, you know, what happened down in Airdrie was horrible. Obviously, we know that, and right away, we had looked at what we could do to stop this from happening again. So we provided a grant to the Alberta Fire Chiefs Association. Was one of our first steps for public awareness and education on the carbon monoxide monitors, and also the Fire Chiefs Association operates. I mean, it operates throughout the province, right? And it's got a proven track record of doing this through our emergency preparedness week and things like that of informing. So that was our first thing. That campaign planning is underway. We also have department officials looking at that, like what it means for legislation around the different jurisdictions across the country, what other people might have done, as well as another point to that was, I'm not thinking off the top of my head right now that I wanted to make for you. But understanding that new houses from, I think it was 2006 in the building code, anything house after 2006, it has to have one of the monitors in it. So it's one of those tough things that, you know, trying to go house to house to do an inspection is not really feasible, obviously. So that's why we put that money into the education campaign through the fire chiefs, because they do a really good job of getting that to people. But we are monitoring and looking at some other things as well. I mean, no decision has been made, but it's definitely something that through our public safety division and what we're looking at building codes, it's something we're very well aware of. So.
Yeah, his concern is specifically related to multi-level units, and if you are doing that work, can he connect with your ministry? Would it be best if I was to write on his behalf and,
for sure.
and provide that connection? Okay, I will certainly do that. Now I want to move on to the floodway development regulation and just bring you up to speed on some of the things that your colleague, the Minister of Environment, has talked about. I understand that Municipal Affairs is working closely with the Ministry of Environment in shaping this policy as it should be. The Ministry of Environment is working on flood hazard mapping, as I'm sure you know. And specific to my constituency in Calgary Elbow and also broadly in Calgary, I understand that the flood hazard maps for the Bow and the Elbow will be completed by the end of 2018. That's what the Minister had said, Minister of Environment had said. And I just wanted to talk about how that your work in municipal affairs, developing floodway development regulations, plugs in to the work that Minister of Environment is doing to create those flood hazard maps.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It is something we are having to work in conjunction with the Minister of Environment on, and obviously, and I know from your background and where you live that there are some issues as well as some other members, not only in Calgary but across the province. So part of the next steps, I mean, there was consultation done previously in 2014, but we are going to do some more consultation and speak with more stakeholders on this to develop you know, something that's going to work for everybody out there as best we can. And once we get these mapped flood zones done, you know, we can consult a little bit further on that to understand better what people think. And, you know, that's one of the things that Municipal Affairs really prides itself on, is making sure we understand what is going to be best for the public out there. So we will work with the Environment Minister and her ministry on this to find a collaborative solution that's going to work best for everybody. And, you know, I don't have a timing on it, you know, because there will have to be more consultation. But any time that, you know, anybody in your area, we have reached out to folks in your area as well before, But if you have anything that you have from them that you want to pass on, I would always appreciate that. And as well, I mean, we talk about the flood mapping. Well, it's also taken into consideration, you know, things like Springbank, right? That's come along. It's definitely something that is important to the government, and we have committed to the project. And it's being managed by Alberta Transportation under Minister Mason. So, and I think he did speak about it, had his estimates as far as I know. But yeah, so it's a collaborative approach. Honestly, it really has to be multi-ministry.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and you know, I'm glad to hear you say that, because one of the things I think is really important is that we recognize historical development patterns. I think if we could jump into our time machine and go back 150 years, we may say, perhaps this is not the place to build downtown Calgary. Perhaps the National Music Centre or the Glenbow Museum shouldn't quite be where it is as it relates to future flood risk. We can't do that. You know, that the entire city of Calgary, and there are other examples, Drumheller, regional municipality, Wood Buffalo, there's lots of examples like that around the province where, in hindsight, perhaps that's not where we would put the city or put the development, but we did. And so there needs to be a balance there of saying, yes, we need to protect people, and we need to do that in a number of ways. Upstream flood mitigation, we need to have some intelligent policy, and I would say some of the intelligent policy we've seen through the city of Calgary is, if you're going to do a major renovation, you're going to put your utilities above grade. You're going to do a new build, utilities, but that makes sense. What I think doesn't make sense would be expropriation by policy, where it restricts it so much that you really effectively hollow out the community. And that I think is not necessarily what I see happening here, which is good, and I think we need to continue down that path. So specifically as it relates to floodway development regulations going forward, I know that there's some exemptions in place in special policy areas, I believe is what the term is, for Wood Buffalo, for Drumheller. And I guess I would ask that that be something you'd also consider for the city of Calgary as it relates to future development policy, to accommodate those existing developments and historical patterns that allow for continued development responsibly and intelligently going forward. Is that something you'll consider?
Yeah, I think right now, as we go forward, I mean, especially with the consultation, I think there's a lot of things on the table, and that's definitely part of that conversation. Understanding, I mean, you're right. I mean, we can't go back in time. Of course, people built beside the river because it was trade routes and everything, right? I mean, it's beautiful too. But that being said, I think we have to find that balance between that development and continued development and the mitigation and common sense, right? I mean, that's a big one. But I think that will work itself out in the consultation, and we're not going to make everybody happy. I don't think, you know, you never can, even though I, you know, tell my kids that every decision I make is the best one. But you know, we have to have everything on the table, I think, and have frank and open conversations about people's priorities and you know, how we make people accountable for themselves too. And you made a good example what you just said about putting utilities up and things like that. It's just common sense, right? It does make sense to do that. So yeah, that's all on the table. Sure.
And so, you know, just to be really clear, my request to you is that we do this in the right order, that the mapping is done, that mitigate first, then map based on mitigated flows, then create policy based on the mitigated flows. That seems to be the right order, and the concern would be, and it doesn't seem that we're on this path, but I just want to flag that the concern would be we go the other way, that we create very restrictive development policies ahead of mitigation happening, and then maybe possibly come back later and change that, and I would urge you not to go that direction. Just briefly then, my last minute here or so, the Emergency Management Act changes and the bill that's been tabled. I just want to commend you for the approach you've taken on that. And as you said earlier, the way that Municipal Affairs goes about things is to do some broad consultation, develop some draft legislation, table that, and allow for input on that over a period of time. Frankly, we wish that other ministries would take that same approach in some legislation that's substantive. But I guess the question I have for you is, what supports will you be able to offer to members who may want to engage their constituents, mine specifically? I wouldn't mind holding a town hall, for example, to hear from my constituents on this particular bill.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I know that some people have kind of approached me about that. You know, it's a tough one because we do want to make sure that we want to make sure that Municipal Affairs is doing it, right? Because we want to make sure we capture all the information. And so, you know, if you have something like that and you want to come forward to us, you know, bring that to us and we can discuss how that might look. We haven't ironed those details out yet about how that's going to look. But I mean, obviously my view of it is Municipal Affairs should be running it because we are the ones doing it, and we have to have our officials there. But, you know, having you there, if, you know.
How's June?
Thank you, Minister.